Hello, I'm John Adams, editor of Digital Photo, and in this video lesson we'll be looking at how you can control contrast when shooting interior scenes. Balancing up the indoor and outdoor exposure is always a big challenge for photographers, and the reason for this is simply because during daylight hours it's much brighter outside than it ever will be inside. To get a good result, you have to make the indoor scene brighter, or you have to make the windows darker. And making the indoors brighter will involve lighting kit, of course, and making the outdoors darker involves waiting until the sun goes down. Now, for most photographers, neither of these options are particularly convenient. So what we need is a way to adjust the intensity of the outdoor and the indoor parts of the scene. We've got to make the outdoors a bit darker, the indoors a bit brighter, and we've got to find a way to blend the two things together. Now, if the difference between indoor and outdoor brightness isn't too extreme, you can sometimes get all you need from a single RAW file. So long as you shoot in RAW on your camera in the first place, you can usually do this. We've got an example on the disk for you. It's called clubhouse.dng. So open that up into Elements or into Photoshop, and let's see how we get on with this single file approach. Well, this is the default picture, the as shot. And to try and get a decent result, all we need to do is move these sliders to try and bring back some life into the foreground or the interior part of the scene, while retaining some detail in the outdoor part of the scene. Now, one of the most important sliders for this is the exposure slider. If we go all the way down, in fact, before I do that, let me just switch on these highlight and shadow clipping warnings. What we have here, the red indicates where the white has burnt out, or where we've overexposed completely and have no detail. And the blue indicates where the shadows have blocked out, so there's no details, they're pure black and have no detail in those areas either. So red, too bright, blue, too dark. Now, if we move our exposure slider, having set those clipping warnings, if we pull it all the way back, we've still got a little bit of burnout there in the outdoors part through the window, and we've got lots and lots of blocked out shadows inside. If we move the exposure slider all the way up to +4 stops, we completely burn out lots of areas in the image, yet we still retain some shadow detail. So we've got a whopping dynamic range within this picture. And that makes it fairly typical of your standard interior shoot, i.e. you've got problems. Now let's just move this exposure slider down a little bit more. If we go to where we're just burning out the highlight detail, let's take that up to about 0.65, so we're just over half a stop up. You can see these red areas here, that's where we've burnt out detail. But if we use the recovery slider, we can bring back a little bit of highlight detail. Just move that over. And you see, you take that until, well, we're going to have to take it all the way actually. So we've taken our recovery almost to 100%. And that has helped bring back some of the detail in the outdoor areas. We can then do the fill light, which brings up the the midtones and the shadows within this foreground area. If we move the fill light over, you can see we're reducing those blue areas, those blocked out shadows. We just move it across. And that's not too bad. We've actually brought some detail back. We've lost contrast, but we can up that just by moving the black slider. This increases the density of the shadows, so cranking that up to around about 20 should fill in for the fill light adjustment we've made. And you can see there our shadows are coming back in with the extra expanse of these blue areas from the clipping warning. Now if we switch the clipping warnings off, we don't want to look at those, now we know they've done their trick. It's looking a bit better than it was before. But there's still a little further we could go. There's still this issue with the outdoors. If we bring the exposure slider down a bit, we can actually bring a bit more detail into the sky. If we see some here, that's going to help. So if we underexpose the shot like so, use a bit more fill light to compensate, and then we'll crank up recovery, there we go. And then I think we're going to have to use brightness just to push this entire image, make it all a bit brighter, and that's now starting to work. That's the kind of thing. You can see that one individual slider doesn't do everything. You have to use them in combination. A little bit of give here, a little bit of take there, a bit of swings and roundabouts, and hopefully we can get a reasonable looking result from this single RAW file. So using those sliders, using the exposure, the recovery, the fill light, the blacks and the brightness, you can go some way to restoring detail in both highlight and shadows within a single RAW conversion. But we're right on the edge of possibilities here, because we're not going to get the best result by doing it this way. There is in fact a better way, and that's by taking two separate exposures, or indeed by making two separate raw conversions. Because using this file, what we can do is actually set up all our sliders to work really well for one particular conversion. Let's just take things back to normal. Let's get that brightness back a bit. There. Now what we need to do is just get our exposure so it looks good for the outdoors. And a little bit of bleaching for outdoors is fine because that looks quite acceptable when you're taking an interior shot. So we don't want to go too much, but I would have thought something like that. So just overexposed there. And we're just looking at the windows to get a reasonable result there. That will be okay. We can then use a bit of recovery and fill light just to help out these window frame areas. And that should be okay. We can now make a conversion of that simply by hitting Open Image and saving it. So there's our picture. We've opened it into Elements. Now all we need to do is go to File, choose Save As, and we'll call it a different name. Okay, so that's one. What we then need to do is reopen the image and convert for the interior, move our raw sliders to get that looking good, and then we'll end up with two separate images, two JPEGs or two TIFFs, which we then blend together. They've both come from the original master image, so we'll have no alignment problems. So that's how you do it using raw files, or alternatively, you just shoot two separate JPEGs. So if we just shut this one down for the time being, we can then open up our source files, Club 1 and Club 2, hold Shift, click them both, and then open them up into the Elements interface. Now what we want to do is have Club 2 active. So if we just move Club 1 out of the way, click on Club 2, so that's the active one. And what we're going to do is copy this and then paste it into the Club 1 image. So a nice quick and easy way to do this one is to hit Control and A on the keyboard. That brings up the marching ants because that's select all. Then we're going to hit Control and C, which is Edit Copy. That copies the image into memory. Then we're going to close it down. Control and W to shut it down. And then we'll be left with Club 1 on screen. And all we have to do now is go to Control and V. And that will paste Club 2 into the Club 1 image. What we then need to do is open up our Layers palette. So just go to Window and choose Layers. And then we can see our Layer 1 and our background, that's Club 1 and Club 2, put together on the same screen. And we can now switch them off and see that they're in perfect register. There's our exposure for the interior lying underneath our exposure for the exterior, or the windows. So what we need to do now is rub out some of this Layer 1 to reveal the better exposed layer from underneath. So if we make sure that Layer 1 is highlighted, that's the active layer we'll be working on. Let's just move that to one side now. What we have to do is pick up our eraser tool. Then we need a nice large soft-edged brush. So I'm going to adjust brush size using the square brackets keys. And I'm going to get a nice big brush. Then I'm just going to start rubbing out that foreground area. There we go. We just remove that. That's the sort of thing. And then what we have to do is reduce brush size a bit so it can be a bit more accurate around these windows. And we want to get a nice subtle blend like so. That's the kind of thing. And we just rub out the bit we don't want, pretty much. A little bit around here. Do it bit by bit and use a progressively smaller brush as you get to more detailed areas. Before long you'll have a nice blend. Now in the full version of Photoshop this is actually a bit easier because we've got something called layer masks in the full version of Photoshop. And they're a bit nicer to use than the eraser because everything's very reversible. But it doesn't mean you can't do it in Elements, it just means you have to be a bit more correct each time you use the eraser. But we just work round these windows till we've got a nice blend. Now, as you get more and more towards the edge of what you're dealing with, the edge of these windows, you may need to use a smaller and smaller brush, and you also might want to reduce the opacity of the eraser. This just makes it a bit less see-through as you're going through things. So drop that down, zoom in a touch. We'll just use our zoom tool and go in tight. Back to our eraser. We've got a fairly small brush now, and we're running at a lower opacity to make the join a bit more subtle, so we can really blend these things nicely together. And that's the kind of way. And you just work around the image, working on these various areas, just to get a good blend going. Now obviously I'm doing this very quickly, you'll take a bit more time over it than I will, but that's a great way to actually blend different contrast levels for outdoors and indoors together. Take two separate shots, either by converting one raw file into two separate conversions with different values in the sliders, or you just simply lock off the camera on a tripod and take two exposures, one for the outside and one for the inside, and then blend those two images together. The important thing, of course, is that the camera doesn't move between the two exposures, or you'll have a horrendous time trying to line the two things up. So the raw option is very good if you're working handheld, because you've only got one image to worry about getting everything in register. But that's pretty much the process. Then you blend them together this way. I'm using the eraser, which is the most difficult route, and as you can see, it's not that difficult. You simply rub out the bits you don't want, then do a little bit of blending with the reduced opacity. Let's just double click the hand tool to go back to full screen. You can see there the result's not bad at all. Pretty seamless considering I've done it very quickly and just used the eraser. If we look at layer 1 and the background, if we just bring that back on screen, you can see we can switch those windows on and off to see the extra detail we're getting from using this technique. So that's how you blend two separate exposures together to get a nice balance between the interior and the exterior light. Give it a try with our image. It's on the CD. It's called Club 1 and Club 2, the two JPEG images. And we've also put the RAW on there, which is clubhouse.dng, so you can practice going right from the RAW conversion if you want to do that as well. Give it a try, and then of course, use that technique on your own images if you've got any interior shots. Thanks for listening. See you next time.